So a new controversial marketing campaign, I guess you could call it, just went out, and it involves China. And if you saw the title, it involves a company, a fast fashion company called Xian, which, if you know anything about fast fashion, H&M, Zara, these types of things, then you know what they sell. They basically are an online retailer. I think they have some shops in some bigger cities, but they're mostly online, and they produce everything here in China, and then they ship it globally. And they had a controversial influencer campaign that just went out. They invited 6 influencers to come visit their factories in Guangzhou, in Shenzhen, or just kind of like a tour where they went around and they saw some offices and they saw some factories, and they went to some, showcase rooms where they could see new styles and new designs. And we are going to talk about it because it backfired completely for them. And I have specific insights to influencer campaigns because in my old job as a marketing manager, I was working for a media company, and we would literally do this type of event where we would hire influencers to come to an area, to an event, to different things that happen here in China, and we would pay them. So we're going to talk a little bit about paid media here in China, specifically foreigners who take these types of roles and go on these trips, these paid trips. We'll talk about a little bit about that because I find it super interesting, and I have insight into it beyond just, oh, Shein is bad. Because that's kind of the take that everybody's been talking about. But I actually have run these campaigns as a marketing manager, so we'll get into that in the back half. I've also been on these campaigns as an influencer. I've been on a couple of them myself. So I'll talk about it from both sides. But let's first talk about Xian and figure out what happened and why it went so wrong. So this basically starts a few months back when a reporter or a news agency put out this report on Xian and talked about all the labor laws that they are breaking here in China, and also the environmental impact they have on China's environment, obviously, because everything's being produced here, but just in general, kind of a scathing report about how bad the company is, in that they mistreat their employees, that they use cotton from Xinjiang. I think that was part of it, because that's a whole thing in the US about the Xinjiang cotton. But they use cotton from places that are essentially in the US, they have been banned. There's a sanction on cotton from Xinjiang. And this company, Xian, is using materials or cotton from those areas. And so this whole report came out to make this company look really bad. They're making people work, 13, 14, even 15 hours a day with very little pay. And so this report came out a few months back, and everybody was like, oh my goodness, there's child labor law issues with this company, all these things that they reported on. And I didn't read the report. I'm just going off of what I read to talk about this. There's been these reports about sweatshops in China for forever, basically since there's been factories in China. And there has been some truth to them in the past. I'm not here to say what is right or wrong on the factories here. But basically that report came out. So this company, Xian, was like, oh man, this makes us look really bad. We're trying to have an IPO in the future. They're thinking of having an IPO, I think, later this year, or maybe they're going to postpone it. But the idea was, we look really bad because this is a really bad report. A lot of people were reporting on it. And the industry they've also been seen as really bad because they often take designs from real designers, people who are trying to be fashion designers. They will copy their style, change it a little bit, just enough to maybe get away with not getting sued. Oftentimes they don't change it at all or that much. So this is another big issue, is that they steal people's designs, they have bad working conditions, they're using cotton that they shouldn't be using. And so people in the US, which is one of their biggest markets, I think it's their second largest market, read these reports and say, oh, let's boycott them, let's not buy stuff from them. I think their biggest market is Brazil. But most of their markets are overseas. Like their big markets where they make most of their money is overseas. And depending on which reports you read, their revenue is anywhere from $10 billion up to $30 billion because, again, the reporting isn't very accurate or very clear. So this is a multi-billion-dollar company that is thinking of doing an IPO in the United States, has, an IPO going public. And they had this really bad marketing, crisis because this report came out and made them look really bad. So they said, hey, why don't we invite some influencers to China and show them that actually it's not bad. We're a normal company. And normally I would get behind this and say, yeah, China is a normal country and Chinese labor conditions are normal. But because I have done influencer campaigns on both sides, being an influencer and then also being a manager who's running the influencing, running the influencers, inviting them and paying them. I have more insight to this. I have real experience with it. And so I'm giving it from my personal experience what I think happened. So they had this marketing crisis and they said, we need to change our image. Let's invite these foreigners to come on this paid trip. And so we can look at the 6 influencers. They said, the report I was reading said there are 6 of them. I looked up to see who they are. And what we see, and this is what we often see, is they had one bigger influencer or 2 bigger influencers who had, hundreds of thousands of followers on Instagram and TikTok and other places. And then they found a couple of smaller ones to kind of fill out and justify why they're making this big media production. And being somebody who's done this, it basically goes like this. You send out hundreds of emails, and most people, depending on what company you're working for, will look at the email and say one of 2 things. They'll say, aren't you associated with like China or the Chinese government? I don't want to work for the CCP. So no, thank you. If they respond, if you get a response. The other group is, how much are you going to pay me? And if you pay me enough, I'll probably do it. So what happens is these media companies, or in this case, Xian themselves, because they were the one running this campaign, will reach out to many influencers and either get no response or get turned down because they aren't willing to offer enough. So they get whoever is essentially ignorant. I don't want to say dumb, but I guess misinformed about what this campaign actually is. So in this case, these people, the one main girl who's getting hit the hardest, this Danny girl, in her video was like, I'm a free thinker and I'm gonna go to China and show you that it's not so bad because I don't think it's so bad. And normally I support that idea. But because I've been on these campaigns and I've run these campaigns, I know that what you're shown is not reality. It's very hyper-focused, and it oftentimes is the white-collar kind of office worker and not the factory worker that you get to engage with. In one of her videos, this Danny girl said, I even talked to one of the factory workers and she said everything's great. And I don't doubt that she interviewed someone, but because she doesn't speak the language, and because most of those people are planted, and they know very well that they can't say anything bad about the company, or the local government, or whatever it is that the event is, right? They can't talk bad about the hosts. Then of course this woman's going to say, oh, my commute's fine, I have normal working hours and I love my job and China's the best country in the world. So if you don't actually know what's going on because you're misinformed or you didn't do your research, you are going to think that, see, I've shown you a version of China that you don't normally see, and your version, which was months and months of research and actually digging into finances and trying to actually talk to real employees who work on the factory line, that's not the reality. But my 15-minute guided tour of a factory between sips of champagne and a beautiful dinner that's 15 courses, and the fact that I'm in another country completely overwhelmed and everybody's from the marketing team is being extremely attentive to anything I ask for, that's the reality. That's real. That's not the staged version of what they want you to see. So, having been on these trips, having planned these trips, I know that what they were shown was not the reality of what's happening in the factories at Xian. So, this was a misguided attempt to improve their image, and we are seeing this more and more and more from Chinese companies, especially ones that have an audience overseas, as they get hit by these reports, true or not. And some of them are fake, and you can read, if you know what you're looking for, you can read them and say, that seems made up. But you can read other ones and say, no, that seems more realistic. And so a 13-hour workday in China seems realistic because this company is producing so much clothing that it would be impossible not to have their factories running pretty much 24/7. And so they also are selling their products at such a price point that you basically have to pay nothing for the labor in the raw materials, the input. In order to sell a full shirt for, $20 US, a fashionable shirt for $20 US, ship it around the world, you basically have to be paying nothing for the resources, including labor and shipping. So there was a miscommunication from the Xian marketing department in basically what they thought they were going to do versus what they actually did. So I think the marketing department thought, hey, we're pretty normal for a fashion company in China, and we want to show that we're pretty normal, not realizing that the Western audience would look at this and say, this is not okay, this is not normal. And that's exactly what happened. We had these people walking through their flagship factory, everything's automated, everything looks beautiful, and they're saying, see, look, we showed you one factory in China that we were allowed to go into and see, and it's beautiful. It's great. Everything's good here. I've been taken on those tours where they take us to one state-of-the-art facility or state-of-the-art manufacturing hub or talent hub or something, and they say, look how clean and beautiful it is. And you say, yeah, but this is one factory that employs 200 people, and your workforce says you have, 200,000 people. So where are the other people that are actually doing the work, that are actually producing the goods? Because it's very easy for you to show this to me, and if you happen to be unfamiliar with this tactic, then you might walk in and be like, wow, everything in China is really beautiful. Wow, I can't believe anybody would say that China is a terrible place. Because what you're shown is the perfect version of it. So it's a really fascinating story, and I think we're going to see more and more of it in the future because this influencer marketing is popular here within China, with influencers within China. And now that China's opening back up and you can travel freely again, I think many of these brands and many of these companies will try to find influencers from abroad to come over and say, look how great China is, because that's what was happening in the past. I remember I used to see videos all the time of Hainan. Oh, come to Hainan. You have a 72-hour visa. You don't even need a visa. Just come to Hainan and enjoy the beautiful scenery and eat the beautiful food and enjoy life in Hainan. And that was a big promotional thing a while back, where they'd get a lot of foreigners to come in and see the beautiful beaches of Hainan. And again, you're showing a very narrow focus of what China is and making it look very good, when in reality, that's just not the reality. What are your thoughts? Do you think we're going to see more of this in the future? Is this interesting to see how propaganda and influencer marketing kind of mingle together? I find it interesting because, like I said, I've been on both sides of it, where I reached out to influencers and would sometimes get nasty emails back being like, oh, you work for the Chinese government and, oh, communist, whatever. And I'd be like, well, kind of. I mean, we are trying to get you to come here and look at a specific aspect that we want to show you of this country, and that is kind of propaganda. But on the other hand, I've also gone on those trips, and I've walked around and I said, you're clearly showing me something that's not the full picture, because I've lived here for so long. And I think we'll see more influencers coming who are clueless, who haven't done their research, and have been offered some amount of money and a free trip. You know, your flights are paid, your hotels are paid, your food's paid, and maybe you make a couple $1,000s. And so if you're a small influencer or even a mid-sized influencer, there are people who will take that. And I've taken it because, sure, why not? I get to say what I want to say, but I still understand that I don't get invited on them very often because I don't play the game as well as other people. But it is profitable. You can make a lot of money off of it, because I've had trips where they paid me thousands of US dollars to show up and to walk around and to smile and do interviews and to make content about the trip. And I've also had offers where they paid me nothing and they just said, it's a free trip. Do you want to go be here in this area? Again, most of the times I turn it down because I've been on them enough that I know that it's not a free trip where you get to just go do whatever you want. It's a very tight itinerary where you're up at, 7 a.m. out the door by 8, and you go see everything that is remotely interesting in the city or province, and you don't ever get to breathe, essentially. 9 o'clock, you're back in your hotel room after being up for 12 hours filming and on buses and on, locations and being interviewed and having your picture taken. And then eventually you're just like, whew, it's too much. But I think we're going to see more of it. I think it's interesting. What are your thoughts? Do you think that it's okay for influencers to take these types of gigs? Or do you think they should be, more selective? Do you think they should be regulated in some way? Because oftentimes these gigs, especially here in China, backfire. But it is interesting. And now I'm rambling, and this is like a 20-minute video again, because I have these thoughts, and my thoughts get the better of me, and then I just keep running and running and running. But I find it fascinating from like a media propaganda standpoint. I find it fascinating from a marketing standpoint, and I find it fascinating from like an influencer standpoint because I've done these trips. What are your thoughts? Do you guys find it interesting? Do you think this type of content is valuable? Do you think it's all fake? Because most influencer stuff is fake. What are your thoughts? Do you buy it when you see this type of content where somebody's like, look at this village, they're alleviating poverty, or look at this factory, it's so clean and neat, and it must be like this everywhere in China? Yeah, curious to know your thoughts on it. Leave a comment below, and I will see you in the next video. It's going to be a little bit different because I'm going to start traveling soon, but watch the next video to find out where I'm going and what I'm doing. It's not a paid influencer campaign. I can guarantee you that. But alright, hit that like button and I'll see you in the next video.